Edelman Trust Barometer is an index that comes out every year, and it has come out every year since 2000, and they assess trust. They're done by the Edelman firm in Chicago. And this year, in January, they came out with 2 data points: trust and insularity. And this is connecting back to a multiracial and multi-ethnic democracy. Trust is how likely are you to trust that government, corporations, nonprofits, and institutions will work in your best interest. That is low in the United States, not surprisingly. And this data was released in January, so it's probably lower now. The other piece of data that they released this year was a notion of insularity. How likely are you to trust someone different than you? So different race, different socioeconomic background, different place of living, different types of jobs. And we've got a problem. 70% insular mindset in the United States, which is big. So if we have that much of an insular mindset, how can we actually build a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy that serves everyone if we don't trust people who are different than us?
I was in Montello, and outside of a candy shop, 2 folks having ice cream. They were from Portage, driving through Jeep. It was a verb with Jeep, but anyway, I introduced myself. I said, I'm a candidate for governor, and I'd like to know what you're most proud of in your community, what you care about. And they asked me if I was a Democrat or Republican, and I said, well, I'm actually a Democratic Socialist running as a Democrat. And right away, I think the gentleman was not interested, and he went on about billionaires and folks are going to leave. But I asked him again what he was most proud of in his community. And he didn't want to answer. So I one more time said, I was a small business owner, because he was talking about billionaires and corporations leaving if we tax them. And when we talked about tax fairness, and I told him about how, as a Democratic Socialist, what that means to me is that even if you don't vote for me, I care about you and your neighbor and your loved ones having access to affordable health care. I care about your family members and your community having a great public school. And now Portage had just had a referenda. So we were able to talk about the property tax connection and how defunding public schools has led us into this cycle of referenda, and your government officials put that on your community to then, be forced to raise your own property taxes. And I looked towards the roads and I said, look, those are the potholes. I want to fund local governments and make sure that those potholes gets filled, and that our state pays towns like Portage their fair share. I don't know if I earned his vote, but I do believe that in the power of a conversation, moving policy. I know that he saw me because I asked him about things that he cared about, and I told him that regardless of what his action is, my responsibility is to do good. And I think there are a lot more Wisconsinites like that, and I'm honored that I've had more conversations like that than I thought I would in my course on the campaign.
Awesome. Thanks, Fran. Kelda.
Angela, one of the fun questions she asked was about music in the 90s. And I think so often about what a golden age I got to grow up in. My early years were in rural Taylor County, north of Highway 29. My family and I lived in a one-room schoolhouse, and I had a pet goat named Penelope. That was back when up north was Dave Obey country, before they tried to make it Tom Tiffany territory, which I don't actually believe that it is. Then we moved down to Madison, and that's where I spent the rest of my childhood. And I got to go to Madison East High School. I believe that everything good that I have been able to accomplish in my life, I owe it to going to public school, and specifically Madison East High School. It is one of the most diverse high schools in our state. It is economically diverse, it is racially diverse, it is culturally diverse, and that is an experience that is rarer and rarer, because the generation before me didn't get it. They had more formal segregation. And we have since resegregated our schools and resegregated our communities, racially and especially economically. That is why one of the most important things that we can do to create good societies and get away from the insularity that's at the heart of your question is to actually interact with each other. You know, we go to separate churches and religious institutions. We shop in different places. We eat in different places. The places where people get to interact with those who are different from them is public schools. And when we lose public schools and public education as the place where we all meet together, it is very hard to grow up and have a government where we can all work together. And I tell my kids all the time, they say, this isn't fair, that's not fair. And I say, yeah, life's not fair. And you better be glad it's not fair because you're on the winning end of that. If we want a fairer world, we all have to be in it together. And it starts with public education.
Thanks, Kelda. Mandela.
So I'll say that the seeds of distrust are sown to benefit the people who've always had power in the first place. The biggest divide in the country is top and bottom. And it's the folks who've made out like bandits. The people who've accumulated all the wealth have left everybody else stuck scrambling for crumbs. And when communities are scrambling for crumbs, it makes you less likely to engage with other communities or individuals that are not yourself, people that don't look like you. It makes you shy away from diversity. It makes you feel as if somebody else is coming to eat your lunch when your lunch has just been taken from you by people who have accumulated more power and wealth than any of us will together. And that's the biggest indictment on our society because this has been allowed to fester. This has been allowed to go on. It couldn't be more apparent than with social media. Social media continues to drive a wedge through communities, continues to leave people pointing fingers at one another on online forums, going at each other's throats, truly acting as if we are at some form of civil war with one another, be it socially or otherwise. And guess who makes all the money? These social media companies, the same old people, time and time again. And so it's important, even me as an individual, I show up in places where there aren't a lot of people that look like me. I show up in spaces, whether it's professionally, whether it's socially, because that's important. When I talk to children at schools anywhere, and they'll ask, how was it? You're the first Black person to hold the office of lieutenant governor. I went to a lot of places where weren't people who looked like me or shared my experience. But I use that as an opportunity to talk about my experience and relate it directly to their life experience. And that's how you start to build bridges. For all the students that I encountered, I'll say, if you see something that you want to do and you see a bunch of people who don't look like you doing it, that's all the more reason for you to do it. And I hope that we can encourage all of our next generation of young people to do the same thing. Go out there and be in spaces where you don't think you're welcome or where you don't think where you belong, because you absolutely should be there and it's necessary for you to be there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mandela.